The job posting promised solitude, decent pay, and a chance to escape. What it did not mention was the list of rules taped to the refrigerator, written in handwriting that looked like it had been scrawled in a desperate hurry. I stood in the kitchen of the isolated cabin, reading each rule for the third time, and I felt the temperature drop even though the wood stove was burning. The previous caretaker had left no forwarding address, no phone number, nothing except these 7 rules and a note at the bottom that simply read, "Do not break them." Not even once. My name is Ethan, and I am 26 years old. 6 months ago, I lost my job at a marketing firm in Boulder when the company downsized. My apartment lease was ending, my savings were running dry, and my girlfriend had left me for someone with better prospects. I was scrolling through obscure job boards late one night when I found it. A caretaker position for a private cabin in the Colorado Rockies. The pay was surprisingly good, and the requirements were minimal. All I had to do was maintain the property, keep the wood stove running during winter, and follow a set of guidelines provided by the owner. It sounded easy. It sounded perfect. It sounded like exactly what I needed to get my life back on track. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. How desperate. How blind to the warning signs that were there from the very beginning. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you are listening to this story and you have ever felt that pull toward the unknown, that curiosity that makes you open doors you know you should leave closed, then hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who understands what it means to make a choice you cannot take back. And tell me in the comments, have you ever ignored a warning you should have heeded? Because I did, and I am still paying the price. I want to know if I am the only one foolish enough to think rules like these could possibly be just superstition, or if others out there have made the same mistake. Because right now, sitting here in this cabin, I feel like the most foolish person who has ever lived. The drive up to the cabin took nearly 4 hours from Boulder. I followed a winding two-lane highway that carved through dense forests of pine and aspen, climbing higher and higher until the air grew thin and cold. The scenery was beautiful in that overwhelming way that nature can be when you are used to concrete and traffic lights. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts, and the mountains rose in the distance like ancient guardians. I had my windows down for the first hour, breathing in the clean mountain air, feeling something like hope for the first time in months. The last 20 minutes were on a dirt road that had not been maintained in years. My old sedan bounced over ruts and rocks, and more than once I considered turning back. The suspension groaned with every bump, and I worried I would blow a tire miles from any help. But desperation has a way of pushing you forward, even when every instinct screams at you to stop. I had $200 left in my bank account, a maxed-out credit card, and nowhere else to go. Turning back was not an option. I had already told my landlord I was moving out. I had already said goodbye to the few friends I had left. There was nothing waiting for me back in Boulder except an empty apartment and a pile of rejection letters from jobs I would never get when I finally arrived. The cabin stood at the end of a narrow clearing, surrounded on 3 sides by thick forest. It was a 2-story structure made of dark wood that had weathered decades of mountain storms. The logs were gray with age, and in some places the bark had peeled away to reveal the pale wood beneath. The windows were small and shuttered, and the front porch sagged slightly to one side, as if the entire structure was leaning away from the forest behind it. Behind the cabin, the forest pressed in close, and beyond that, the jagged peaks of the Rockies rose like silent sentinels. There was no cell phone signal, no neighbors within 10 miles, just me, the cabin, and the wilderness. The isolation was exactly what I had been looking for, or so I thought at the time. I parked my car and got out, stretching my legs after the long drive. The silence hit me immediately. In Boulder, there was always noise. Traffic, people, music, the hum of the city that never quite goes away. But here, there was nothing. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional cry of a bird I could not identify. It was peaceful. It was unsettling. It was both at once. The owner, a man named Mr. Garrison, had sent me a key and instructions by mail. He lived somewhere on the East Coast and had inherited the property from a relative. He had never visited it himself, he told me over email, and he had no intention of doing so. All he wanted was someone to keep the place from falling apart. He would pay me $2,000 a month, plus a stipend for supplies. In exchange, I would live there alone, maintain the property, and follow the rules he would leave for me. When I asked him about the rules during our brief phone conversation, he had gone silent for a long moment before saying, "Just follow them. That is all you need to know." The tone of his voice should have been my first warning. It was flat, emotionless, the kind of voice someone uses when they are trying very hard not to feel anything. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint undertone of something I could not quite identify. Something metallic and cold, like old coins left in a jar for too long. The interior was simple, a living room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a staircase leading to the second floor. The furniture was old but sturdy, the kind of heavy wooden pieces that had been built to last. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust that puffed up when I touched it. Clearly, no one had been here in weeks, maybe months. On the kitchen counter, I found a handwritten note and a list. The note was brief. "Ethan, welcome. Everything you need is here. Follow the rules exactly. Do not deviate. Do not test them. Your predecessor learned the hard way. Good luck." I picked up the list and read it slowly. My hands were shaking, though at the time I told myself it was just from the cold. The cabin was freezing, and I could see my breath in the air. Asterisk the rules. Rule 1. Never open the basement door after sunset. Rule 2. If you hear knocking on the windows at night, do not look outside. Rule 3. Keep all curtains closed between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Rule 4. Do not speak to anyone who claims to be the previous caretaker. Rule 5. If the radio turns on by itself, leave it playing until it stops on its own. Rule 6. Never acknowledge footsteps you hear on the second floor. You are the only one in the cabin. Rule 7. If you find the front door unlocked in the morning, do not leave the cabin until afternoon. Asterisk I read the list twice, then a third time, then a fourth. My first reaction was to laugh. It felt like something out of a low-budget horror movie, the kind of thing my college roommate would have made up to scare freshmen during orientation week. But the handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, and the note at the bottom chilled me. Do not break them. Not even once. There was something about those words, the way they were pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through, that made me believe whoever wrote them had meant every word. This was not a joke. This was not someone trying to be clever or atmospheric. This was a warning that I set the list down and explored the rest of the cabin, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. The living room had a worn couch covered in faded brown fabric, a rocking chair that creaked when I tested it, and an old radio on a side table. The radio looked like it was from the 1960s, with a wood-grain finish and a large analog dial. The dial was set to a frequency that showed nothing but static. I turned it off and moved on. The kitchen was stocked with canned goods and dry supplies: beans, soup, pasta, rice, coffee, powdered milk. Enough to last me several weeks if I rationed carefully. There was a propane stove for cooking and a large sink with a hand pump for water. No running water meant I would have to haul it from the well outside. I tested the pump, and after a few squeaky strokes, cold water gushed out. At least that worked. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. One bedroom had a bed with clean sheets, a nightstand with a small lamp, and a dresser with empty drawers. The other was empty except for a single chair facing the window. I walked over to the chair and looked out. The view was stunning and unsettling in equal measure. Trees stretched endlessly into the distance, a sea of dark green and brown that seemed to go on forever. There were no roads, no power lines, no signs of human civilization. Just wilderness, just forest, just trees that had been here long before I was born and would be here long after I was gone. Asterisk, I tested the chair, sitting down for a moment. It was positioned at an odd angle, facing directly out the window, as if someone had spent hours sitting here, watching the forest. I wondered what they had been looking for, or what had been looking back. The chair was worn smooth on the arms, as if someone had gripped it tightly, over and over, night after night. The basement door was in the kitchen, tucked beside the pantry. It was heavy wood, painted white, with a simple latch and a deadbolt. I tested the handle. Locked. I checked my keyring, but there was no key for it. Probably for the best, I thought. Rule number 1 was clear. Never open the basement door after sunset. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 4:47 p.m., and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I decided not to test the door at all, at least not yet. Maybe during the day, I told myself. Maybe when the sun is high and bright and I can see clearly. But not now. Not in the fading light. That first night, I built a fire in the wood stove and made myself a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers. The silence was oppressive. I had lived in cities my entire life, and I had forgotten what true quiet sounded like. No cars, no sirens, no voices, no music from the apartment next door, no dogs barking or people arguing or televisions playing through thin walls. Just the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. I told myself I would get used to it. I had to. This was my home now, at least for the next few months. At 9:45 p.m., I closed all the curtains as instructed. I did not know why, but I was not ready to test the rules yet. The curtains were heavy and thick, made of some dark fabric that blocked out every bit of light from outside. The cabin felt smaller with them closed, more claustrophobic, like the walls were pressing in. I sat on the couch and tried to read a book I had brought, a thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer, but I could not focus. The shadows cast by the firelight seemed to move on their own, flickering and dancing across the walls in ways that did not quite match the movement of the flames. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see something looking back. Even though the curtains were closed at 11:17 p.m., I heard the first knock. That it was soft, almost polite. 3 taps on the living room window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, my book slipping from my hands and landing on the floor with a soft thud. The knocking came again, 3 deliberate taps, evenly spaced, almost rhythmic. And then silence. My heart hammered in my chest so hard I could hear it in my ears. Rule number 2. If you hear knocking on the windows at night, do not look outside. I forced myself to stay seated. I stared at the curtain, watching for any movement, any shadow, any sign of what might be out there. The fabric hung perfectly still. The knocking did not come again. I sat there for what felt like an hour, barely breathing, waiting. Finally, I stood up, my legs shaky, and went upstairs to bed, locking the bedroom door behind me even though I knew I was alone. Or at least, I was supposed to be alone. I did not sleep well that night. I kept waking up, listening for sounds that were not there. Or worse, sounds that were. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, every groan of the old wood settling made me jolt awake, my heart racing. I would lie there in the darkness, straining to hear, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was safe, that the rules would protect me if I just followed them. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. I went downstairs and checked the front door. Locked. I tested it 3 times, pulling hard on the handle, making sure the deadbolt was secure. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe the knocking had been a branch scraping the glass. Maybe I was just on edge. Maybe there was a rational explanation for everything. I made coffee using the hand pump and some of the supplies in the pantry, and I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. I spent the day chopping wood, exploring the property, and getting my bearings. The well was about 50 yards from the cabin, a stone structure with a wooden roof and a bucket on a rope. The water was cold and clear, and I filled several containers to bring back to the cabin. I found an old shed behind the cabin filled with tools and supplies. Axes, saws, rope, nails, tarps. Everything I might need to maintain the property was there, organized neatly on shelves and hanging from hooks on the walls. Behind the shed, the forest pressed in close. I walked to the tree line and looked into the darkness between the trunks. The trees were old, massive pines with bark like dragon scales. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles that muffled every sound. I took a few steps into the forest and immediately felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the overwhelming urge to turn around and run. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees, half expecting to see something move in the shadows. But there was nothing, just trees and silence and the feeling that I was not alone. That night, the knocking came again. And this time, it was louder. It started at 11 p.m. exactly, 3 heavy knocks on the living room window, loud enough to rattle the glass. Then 3 more knocks on the kitchen window. Then the back door. Then the front door. The knocking moved around the cabin in a slow circle, methodical and deliberate, as if something was testing every entrance, looking for a way in. I sat on the couch, my hands clenched into fists, and I did not look. I did not move. I just listened as the knocking continued for nearly 20 minutes before finally stopping. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. I chopped wood in the morning, hauled water from the well, made repairs to the cabin. I replaced a broken shutter on one of the upstairs windows. I patched a hole in the roof where rain had been leaking through. I kept myself busy, kept my mind occupied, tried not to think about the knocking or the rules or the feeling that something was watching me from the forest. The isolation was difficult, but the pay was good, and I had nowhere else to go. I followed the rules carefully. I kept the curtains closed at night. I ignored the knocking when it came. I did not open the basement door. I told myself that as long as I followed the rules, everything would be fine. As long as I did not break them, I would be safe. On the fourth night, the radio turned on by itself. I was sitting by the fire, reading, when I heard the crackle of static. I looked up and saw the old radio on the side table glowing faintly, the dial illuminated from within. The dial had not been touched, but a low, distorted voice was coming through the speaker. I could not make out the words, just a mumbling, rhythmic cadence that rose and fell like a chant or a prayer. It sounded almost like someone speaking in a language I did not recognize, or perhaps speaking backwards. The words twisted and wrong. Rule number 5. If the radio turns on by itself, leave it playing until it stops on its own. I sat there, listening to the static and the voice. It went on for nearly an hour, and I tried to focus on my book, but I could not stop listening. The voice seemed to be getting closer, as if the speaker was moving toward the microphone, getting louder and more insistent. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The radio went silent, the light faded, and the cabin was plunged back into quiet. I stared at the radio for a long time, my hands trembling. I wanted to unplug it, to throw it out the window, to smash it with an axe and bury the pieces in the forest. But the rule was clear. Leave it playing until it stops on its own. That was when I began to understand that the rules were not suggestions. They were survival instructions. They were the only thing standing between me and whatever was out there in the darkness. On the 6th night, I heard the footsteps. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the unmistakable creak of floorboards above me. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth in the empty bedroom. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. I was on the 2nd floor. There was no 3rd floor. There was nothing above me but the roof and the cold night sky. Rule number 6. Never acknowledge footsteps you hear on the 2nd floor. You are the only one in the cabin. I clenched my fists and forced myself to lie back down. The footsteps continued, pacing back and forth, back and forth. I counted each creak, each groan of the old floorboards, trying to focus on the numbers instead of the fear. 23 steps before they stopped. Then silence. Then, 5 minutes later, they started again. 23 steps. Always the same pattern. I lay there in the darkness, listening, my entire body tense, until finally, around 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped for good. I did not sleep at all that night. The next morning, I checked the empty bedroom. The chair was still facing the window. Nothing had been disturbed. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. No footprints, no marks. But when I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the snow outside. Fresh footprints, leading from the forest to the cabin and back again. They circled the house twice, walking around the entire perimeter, then disappeared into the trees. The footprints were large, too large to be mine, and they were barefoot. I could see the outline of toes, the impression of a heel, the way the snow had been pressed down by the weight of something walking on 2 legs. I was not alone out here. I spent the next few days on edge, jumping at every sound. I started checking the windows obsessively, making sure the curtains were closed, making sure the locks were secure. I checked the front door 5, 6, 7 times before going to bed each night. The knocking continued every night, sometimes on the windows, sometimes on the walls, sometimes on the doors. The radio turned on 3 more times, each time playing that same distorted voice, that same incomprehensible chanting. The footsteps paced above me almost every night, 23 steps, always the same pattern, always between midnight and 3:00 a.m., but I followed the rules. I did not look outside. I did not acknowledge the sounds. I kept the curtains closed. I told myself that as long as I followed the rules, I would be safe. As long as I did not break them, whatever was out there could not get in. And then, on the 10th night, I made my first mistake that I woke at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of knocking. But this time, it was not on the windows. It was on the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks that echoed through the cabin and seemed to shake the very walls. I lay in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and I listened. The knocking came again, 3 measured knocks, deliberate and patient. Then a voice. "Ethan, let me in." It was a man's voice, rough and tired, like someone who had been walking through the cold for hours. He sounded desperate, on the edge of breaking. "Ethan, please. It is cold out here. I need help." I sat up slowly, my mind racing. None of the rules mentioned knocking on the door. They only mentioned windows. Maybe this was different. Maybe this was someone who actually needed help. Maybe there was a hiker lost in the woods, or someone whose car had broken down on the dirt road miles away. Maybe I was overthinking this that I crept to the bedroom door and opened it a crack, listening. "Ethan, I know you are in there. I am the previous caretaker. I need to talk to you. Please." Rule number 4. Do not speak to anyone who claims to be the previous caretaker. I backed away from the door, my mouth going dry. The voice continued, pleading, desperate, the words tumbling over each other in a rush. "I made a mistake, Ethan. I broke one of the rules. Just one. And now I cannot leave. I have been out here for weeks. Please, you have to help me. You have to let me in. I am so cold. I am so tired. Please." The voice cracked on the last word, and I heard something that might have been a sob. I stood there in the darkness of my bedroom, torn between the rules and the very human sound of someone in pain. What if he was real? What if he really was the previous caretaker and he really was trapped out there, freezing in the mountain cold? But the rule was clear. Do not speak to anyone who claims to be the previous caretaker. I stayed silent. The voice went on for nearly 20 minutes, alternating between pleading and anger. "Why will you not help me? I can see you in there. I know you are listening. Just open the door. Just let me in. I will not hurt you. I just need to get warm. Please, Ethan. Please." And then, finally, silence. I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and slow, walking from one end to the other. Then they stopped. I waited in the darkness, barely breathing, listening for any other sound. But there was nothing more. In the morning, I checked the front door. It was unlocked. Rule number 7. If you find the front door unlocked in the morning, do not leave the cabin until afternoon. I locked the door and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking so badly I had to clasp them together to make them stop. I did not know how the door had been unlocked. I had checked it before bed. I was certain it had been locked. I had turned the deadbolt 3 times, checking and rechecking, the way I had every night since I arrived. But now it was open, as if someone had simply turned the handle from the inside and walked out. Or walked in. I waited until 12:15 p.m., then opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cold and crisp, and my breath came out in white clouds. The forest was silent, not even the sound of birds. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me from the trees, but there was nothing, just trees and snow and emptiness. I walked around the perimeter of the cabin, checking for any signs of disturbance. The footprints from days before had been covered by fresh snow, but there were new ones. These led from the front door to the edge of the clearing, then stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. That afternoon, I found something that changed everything. I was chopping wood behind the cabin, trying to work off the nervous energy that had been building inside me for days, when I noticed a patch of disturbed earth near the tree line. The snow had been scraped away, and the ground beneath was dark and loose, as if it had been recently dug up. I walked over and knelt down, brushing away more snow with my gloved hands. Beneath the surface, I found a piece of fabric, dark blue and torn. I pulled at it, and it came loose, revealing a worn backpack half buried in the frozen earth. Inside the backpack, I found a journal, a flashlight that no longer worked, and a photograph of a man standing in front of the cabin. He looked to be in his 30s, with a beard and a kind smile. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Daniel, Day 1. The journal cover was stained and water damaged, but the writing inside was still legible. I opened it to the first page and read, my heart sinking with every word. "My name is Daniel. I am the caretaker of this cabin. I have been here for 3 months. I thought I could handle it. I thought the rules were just superstition. I was wrong." I flipped through the pages, reading frantically. Daniel had documented everything in meticulous detail. The knocking, the radio, The footsteps. He had followed the rules at first, just like me. He had been careful, diligent, convinced that as long as he did what he was told, he would be fine. But then, one night, he had broken rule number 1. He had opened the basement door after sunset. The entry was dated November 3rd, and the handwriting was shaky, the words barely legible. I should not have opened it. I should not have looked. There is something down there, something that has been waiting. It knows my name now. It knows I am here. I saw it in the darkness, and it saw me. I tried to close the door, but it would not close all the way. There is a gap now, just a crack, but I can feel it watching me through the gap. I can hear it breathing. I do not think I can leave. The next entry was dated November 5th. I tried to leave this morning. The front door was unlocked, just like the rule said it would be. I waited until noon, got in my car, and drove away. I made it 5 miles down the mountain before the road just ended. Not like there was a washout or a fallen tree, but like the road just stopped existing. I turned around and came back. I tried again in the afternoon, took a different route. Same thing. The road ends. I always end up back here. The cabin will not let me go. November 7th. I hear my own voice calling to me from the forest. It sounds exactly like me, but the words are wrong. It says things I would never say. It tells me to come outside. It tells me to open the door again. I keep the curtains closed, but I can feel it watching. I know it is out there. November 10th. I saw my reflection in the window today, even though I was standing on the other side of the room. It was smiling at me. I was not smiling. November 12th. The footsteps are getting louder. They are not just upstairs anymore. Sometimes I hear them right behind me, so close I can feel the floorboards shake. But when I turn around, there is nothing there. I am so tired. I have not slept in days. The entries became increasingly incoherent after that, the handwriting deteriorating into barely legible scrawls. It is in the cabin now. I can feel it watching me. It stands in the corner of my room at night. I can see it out of the corner of my eye, but when I look directly at it, it is not there. I tried to leave again. I got in my car and drove and drove and drove, but I always end up back here. Always. I cannot leave. It will not let me leave. The final entry was dated 3 weeks ago, November 21st. I understand now. The cabin is not a place. It is a trap. The rules are not meant to protect you. They are meant to keep you here long enough for it to learn everything about you. Your name, your voice, your face, your fears. Once it knows you, it owns you. And once it owns you, you can never leave. If someone finds this, tell them to follow the rules. Tell them not to break them. Not even once. It only needs one mistake. Just one. And then you belong to it. I am so tired. I cannot fight anymore. I think I am going to open the door again. Maybe if I go down there, it will stop. Maybe if I give it what it wants, this will all be over. Asterisk, that was the last entry. I closed the journal, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I looked back at the cabin, and for the first time, I felt true fear. Not the kind that makes your heart race, but the kind that settles into your bones and does not leave. The kind that whispers to you in the dark and tells you that you have already made a mistake. You just do not know it yet. The kind that tells you there is no way out. Asterisk, I went back inside and locked the door. I checked every window, every latch, every lock. I built a fire and sat by it, the journal in my lap, and I tried to think. I could leave. I could get in my car right now and drive away. But Daniel had tried that. He had tried multiple times, and he had always ended up back here. I opened the journal again and read through it more carefully, looking for any clue, any hint about what was in the basement, what was out there in the forest, what this thing was that had trapped Daniel here. But there were no answers, just the rambling, terrified thoughts of a man who had realized too late that he had made a terrible mistake. That night, the knocking was louder than ever. It started at 10 p.m., exactly when I closed the curtains, and it did not stop. It came from every window, every wall, every corner of the cabin. The sound was rhythmic, insistent, like a heartbeat. Knock, knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. Over and over, without pause, without variation. I sat on the couch, covering my ears, but I could still hear it. The sound seemed to vibrate through the walls, through the floor, through my very bones. And then, at 2:33 a.m., the radio turned on. But this time, the voice was clear. Crystal clear, as if someone was standing right next to the radio, speaking directly into it. Ethan. I looked at the radio, my blood turning to ice. Ethan, I know you found the journal. I know you know what is down there. You are curious, are you not? You want to see. You want to know. Everyone does, eventually. Daniel lasted 3 months. How long do you think you will last? I wanted to turn the radio off, to smash it, to throw it out the window. But the rule was clear. Leave it playing until it stops on its own. You are going to open the door, Ethan. Everyone does. The rules are not meant to protect you. They are meant to make you curious. Meant to make you wonder what happens if you break them. And once you start wondering, it is only a matter of time. I have been waiting for you, Ethan. I have been waiting for a very long time. The radio went silent. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding, and I made a decision. I was going to follow the rules, no matter what. I was not going to end up like Daniel. I was not going to let curiosity kill me the way it had killed him. I would stay here, follow the rules, collect my pay, and eventually, Mr. Garrison would come check on me, or send someone, and I would leave. I just had to wait it out. But the cabin had other plans. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I could not have imagined. The knocking grew so loud that the windows rattled in their frames. I was afraid the glass would shatter. I stuffed towels against the window frames, trying to muffle the sound, but it did not help. The footsteps upstairs became constant, pacing back and forth without rest. 23 steps, over and over, all through the night, every night. I started sleeping on the couch downstairs because I could not stand being in the bedroom anymore. Listening to those footsteps directly above me. The radio turned on every single night now, sometimes multiple times. And each time, the voice spoke to me. It knew things about me that no one should know. It knew about my ex-girlfriend Maya, about the fight we had before she left. It knew what I had said to her, the cruel words I had used, the things I regretted. It knew about my father, who had died of cancer when I was 12. It knew how I had been too afraid to visit him in the hospital at the end, how I had let my mother go alone, how I had lived with that guilt for 14 years that IT whispered secrets I had never told anyone, things I had buried deep in my memory and never spoken aloud, things I had tried to forget. You are a coward, Ethan. You have always been a coward. That is why Maya left you. That is why your father died alone. And that is why you will never leave this cabin. Because deep down, you know you deserve to be here. You deserve to be punished. Every morning, the front door was unlocked. Every single morning. I would check it before bed, turning the deadbolt multiple times, even putting a chair against it. But when I woke up, the chair would be moved, and the door would be standing open, letting in the cold mountain air that I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I sat by the fire, watching the basement door, feeling it pull at me. There was a magnetic quality to it now, as if it was calling to me, promising answers, promising an end to the fear and the uncertainty. The door seemed to hum with energy, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I could hear voices coming from behind it. Whispers. My name, over and over. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. On the 14th night, I broke that I do not know what came over me. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the days and days without sleep. Maybe it was the isolation, the knowledge that I was trapped here with no way out. Maybe it was the voice on the radio, whispering my name over and over until I could not think straight. Or maybe it was simply that I had reached my limit, that threshold where fear becomes curiosity, where terror becomes a desperate need to understand. I stood in front of the basement door at 11:47 p.m., my hand on the deadbolt. The sun had set hours ago. I was breaking rule number 1, the most important rule. Never open the basement door after sunset. But I had to know. I had to see what was down there. What had Daniel seen? What was waiting in the darkness below? The questions had been eating at me for days, consuming every waking thought, until I could think of nothing else. The not knowing was worse than anything I might find down there. At least, that is what I told myself. I turned the deadbolt. The click echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I pulled the door open slowly, and a wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it that metallic smell I had noticed on my first day, but stronger now, almost overwhelming. The smell of old blood and rust, and something else, something organic and rotting. The darkness beyond the door was absolute. It was not just the absence of light, but something deeper, thicker, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. I could feel it pressing against me, cold and heavy and patient. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing wooden stairs descending into the earth that I took the first step down. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. I counted each step as I descended. 7, 8, 9. The air grew colder with each step, and my breath came out in thick white clouds that hung in the beam of my flashlight. 12, 13, 14. The walls were rough stone, damp and glistening with moisture that reflected my light in strange patterns. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement opened into a larger space. My flashlight beam swept across the room, and what I saw made me forget how to breathe. The basement was not empty. The walls were covered in writing. Hundreds, maybe thousands of words carved directly into the stone with something sharp. Names, dates, messages, warnings. I stepped closer and read some of them. Thomas Blackwell, 1967. It took my brother. Sarah Chun, 1982. Do not trust the voice. Marcus, 1995. It wears their faces. And near the bottom, fresher than the others, carved in shaky letters. Daniel, 2024. I am sorry. I could not stop myself. In the center of the room was a well. Not a water well, but something else entirely. It was about 6 feet in diameter, surrounded by a low stone wall. I walked toward it slowly, my legs moving on their own, drawn forward by some force I could not resist. The well was impossibly dark, darker even than the basement itself. I shone my flashlight down into it, but the beam just disappeared, swallowed by the darkness as if the well had no bottom. And then I heard it, breathing. Deep, slow breaths coming from the well, rising up from whatever impossible depth existed below. Each breath was wet and rasping, like lungs filled with fluid struggling to draw air. And with each breath, I felt something change in the room. The temperature dropped even further. The darkness seemed to grow thicker, more solid that I should have run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and sprint back up those stairs, to slam the door shut and never open it again. But I could not move. I stood there, frozen, staring down into that absolute darkness, and I felt it staring back. Ethan. The voice came from the well. My voice. Exactly my voice, down to every inflection and tone. But the words were wrong, twisted, spoken with an accent I could not place and a cadence that made my skin crawl. Ethan, you came. Finally. I have been waiting so long. So very, very long. What are you? I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was perfect silence. Then came a sound like laughter. If laughter could sound like breaking glass and screaming children and the death rattle of something ancient and terrible. I am the space between. The gap in the foundation. The crack in the walls. I am what was here before the mountains rose, and what will be here when they crumble to dust. This place, this cabin, this well, they are mine. They have always been mine. And now, Ethan, now you are mine too. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beams swinging wildly across the walls. That is when I saw them, the others, pressed into the walls like insects trapped in amber, their forms barely visible in the stone itself. Dozens of them, maybe more. People who had been absorbed by the basement, by the walls, by whatever lived in that well. I could see their faces, frozen in expressions of terror and despair. Their mouths open in silent screams that would never end. Asterisk, and near the bottom of the stairs, pressed into the stone beside the door, I saw Daniel. His face was twisted in agony, his hands pressed against the stone as if he had been trying to claw his way out. His eyes were still open, still aware, still conscious. Trapped. Forever. Run. Daniel's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible, somehow carried through the stone itself. Run, Ethan. Before it takes you too. Before you become like us. Run. I ran. I bolted up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily. Behind me, I heard something moving in the darkness, something massive and ancient pulling itself up from the depths of that well. The breathing grew louder, closer, accompanied by the sound of something wet dragging across stone. That I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt. I dragged the kitchen table over and shoved it against the door. Then the chairs. Then everything else I could move. I piled furniture against that door until it was completely blocked. And even then, I could feel something on the other side, pressing against the wood, testing its strength, The door began to bow inward that I ran to the living room and grabbed the radio. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I turned the dial, searching for any frequency, any signal, any way to call for help. But there was nothing. Just static. Just that endless, empty hiss that filled the cabin with white noise. And then, through the static, a voice. Not the thing from the basement. Not my voice. But Mr. Garrison's voice, clear as day, as if he were standing right next to me. "Ethan, if you are hearing this, then you have broken the first rule. You have opened the door. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I hoped you would be different. I hoped you would last longer. They all break eventually, you see. The curiosity is too strong. The pull is too powerful. The thing in the well, it knows how to get inside your head. It knows how to make you come to it." "What is it?" I shouted at the radio, even though I knew he could not hear me. "What the hell is it?" "It has many names," Garrison's voice continued, as if answering my question. "The Watcher. The one below. The thing that waits. My grandfather built this cabin over the well in 1952. He thought he could trap it, contain it, keep it from spreading. He thought the rules would be enough. But it is patient. It has all the time in the world. And eventually, everyone breaks. Everyone goes down those stairs. And when they do, it learns them. It takes their voice, their face, their memories, and then it adds them to the walls. Another soul for its collection." The furniture blocking the basement door exploded outward. The table and chairs flew across the kitchen as if they weighed nothing, crashing into the walls with tremendous force. The basement door hung open, revealing that absolute darkness beyond, and from that darkness came something that should not exist. It was not a creature, not in any traditional sense. It was more like a hole in reality, a void shaped vaguely like a person, but wrong in every way. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent at angles that defied anatomy. Its skin, if you could call it that, was the color of deep water at midnight, and it seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, drinking it in and giving nothing back. Where its face should have been was only darkness, but in that darkness, I could see eyes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All the people it had taken, all staring out at me from that impossible face, and then it smiled with my mouth. My smile. Perfect and terrible. "You cannot run, Ethan. You are part of this place now. You opened the door. You broke the rule. And now you belong to me, just like all the others. Just like Daniel. Just like every caretaker who came before him. I did something then that I cannot fully explain. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the memory of Daniel's face in the stone, still aware, still trapped, still suffering after all this time. But I grabbed the kerosene lamp from the mantel, the one I had been using for light before I got the wood stove working properly, and I threw it at the thing. The lamp shattered against it, and kerosene splashed across its form. I grabbed a burning log from the wood stove with my bare hands, ignoring the searing pain, and I threw that too. The thing caught fire, but it did not burn the way normal things burn. The flames were wrong, colored in shades I have no words for, hues that hurt to look at, that made my eyes water and my head throb. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal tearing and glass shattering, and every scream I had ever heard compressed into a single moment of pure agony. It stumbled backward, toward the basement door, its form flickering and distorting like a television losing signal. "This changes nothing," it hissed. Its voice no longer mine, but something older, something that spoke in languages dead before humanity learned to make fire. "I will wait. I have waited for centuries. I will wait centuries more. This cabin is mine. This mountain is mine. And you, Ethan, you will return to me. They always do." It disappeared down the stairs, leaving behind only that smell of rust and rot and ancient earth. The basement door slammed shut on its own, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a final, decisive click. I collapsed to my knees, my burned hands throbbing, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror. The radio crackled to life one more time. "If you have survived, if you are still alive and conscious and yourself, then you have done something no one else has managed. You have fought back. But it is not over, Ethan. It will never be over. Not as long as you stay there. You must leave. Now. Tonight. Do not wait for morning. Do not follow the rules anymore. The rules are part of the trap. They keep you there long enough for it to learn you, to understand you, to take you. Drive away and do not look back. and pray that the road lets you leave. Pray that you were strong enough, that you heard it enough, that it will release its hold on you. Pray, Ethan, because that is all you can do now. The radio went silent that I did not hesitate. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and ran out the front door. I did not bother locking it. I did not care about the rules anymore. I just ran through the snow to my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my burned hands screaming in pain as I fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over on the third try. I threw the car into reverse and spun around, my tires struggling for purchase in the snow. Then I floored it, speeding down that dirt road faster than was safe, faster than was sane, not caring if I crashed, not caring about anything except getting away from that cabin and whatever lived beneath it. The trees flew past in a blur. The road twisted and turned, and I took every curve at dangerous speeds, my headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the forest that pressed in on both sides. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. I kept expecting the road to end, to simply cease to exist the way it had for Daniel. I kept expecting to find myself turning around, driving back toward the cabin, trapped in an endless loop, but the road kept going. 0.4 miles, 5 miles, 6 miles. I saw the junction with the main highway, that blessed strip of asphalt that meant civilization, that meant safety, that meant escape. I turned onto it without slowing down, my tires squealing on the pavement, and I just drove. I drove through the night, not stopping, not slowing down, putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. Dawn broke as I reached the outskirts of Boulder. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner and finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands were badly burned, blistered and raw. My clothes were soaked with sweat despite the cold. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. But I was alive. I was free. I had escaped. I went to the hospital that morning. They treated my burns and asked questions I could not answer. I told them I had an accident with a camping stove. They did not believe me, but they did not press. What could I say? The truth? That I had burned my hands on a log while fighting something that should not exist? They would have called for a psychiatric evaluation. I tried calling Mr. Garrison. The number I had been given was disconnected. I tried emailing him. The address bounced back. I searched for information about him online. Nothing. It was as if he had never existed. The only proof I had that any of it was real was the burns on my hands and Daniel's journal, which I had shoved into my jacket pocket before fleeing the cabin. I spent the next few days in a motel, trying to process what had happened. I read through Daniel's journal again and again, looking for answers, looking for some way to make sense of it all. On the last page, hidden beneath a fold in the cover, I found something I had missed before. A phone number, written in small, careful digits. I called it. A woman answered on the third ring. Her voice was tired, old, weary beyond measure. "You were calling about the cabin," she said. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because that is the only reason anyone ever calls this number anymore. My name is Margaret. I was Mr. Garrison's sister. The cabin belonged to our grandfather, Thomas Garrison. He is the one who built it. Your brother hired me. He told me to follow the rules." "The rules," she laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness and grief. "The rules are a lie, son. They were never meant to protect you. They were meant to keep you there long enough for it to choose you. My grandfather discovered that well in 1951 while surveying land for a mining operation. He saw what was down there, what lived in the darkness beneath the mountain. And it saw him. It showed him things, promised him things. Wealth, power, immortality. All he had to do was feed it. My blood ran cold. Feed it. People, son. It eats people, not their bodies, but their souls, their consciousness, their very essence. It traps them in the stone, in the earth, keeps them alive and aware and suffering forever. My grandfather spent the rest of his life bringing people to that cabin. Hikers who went missing, drifters no one would notice. Anyone he could lure to that place. He would give them the rules, tell them to follow them exactly, and then he would wait. Because the rules are not protection. They are temptation. They make you curious. They make you wonder. And eventually, everyone breaks. Everyone goes down those stairs. But why? Why would he do that? Because it gave him time. Every person it took, every soul it trapped, bought him another year of life. My grandfather lived to be 107 years old. He should have died decades earlier, but the thing in the well kept him alive. It kept him young. And when he finally died, He passed the responsibility to my brother. And my brother, God forgive him, continued the tradition. He hired caretakers, told them about the rules, and waited for them to break. Daniel was the third one this year alone. I felt sick. How many? How many people has that thing taken? Over the decades? Hundreds. Maybe more. The walls down there, they are covered with them. Every person who went down those stairs, every person who saw what was in that well, they all ended up in the stone. My grandfather documented them all in a ledger. Names, dates, how long they lasted before they broke. Some lasted a few days. Some lasted months. But they all broke eventually. I got out, I said. I fought it. I heard it. And I drove away, and the road did not end. I escaped. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was soft, almost pitying. You heard it? You fought back. Yes. I set it on fire. I drove it back down into the basement, and I left. Then you did something no one has ever done before. You should be dead, son, or worse than dead. The fact that you are alive and free means you are either incredibly lucky or incredibly strong. But let me give you some advice. Never go back there. Never speak of that place to anyone who might be tempted to investigate. And pray, every single day, that you heard it enough that it has released its hold on you. Because if it has not, if it is still connected to you in some way, it will call you back. And next time, you might not be able to resist. What about the others? What about Daniel and all the people trapped down there? We have to help them. We have to do something. There is nothing you can do. Once it takes you, once you are in the stone, there is no coming back. My brother spent years researching, looking for a way to free them, to destroy the thing in the well. He found nothing. It is old, son. Older than this country, older than the mountains themselves. Some things cannot be killed. Some things can only be avoided. Then why are you telling me this? Why not just let me forget about it and move on? Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I want you to do something for me. I want you to tell your story. Write it down. Post it online. Warn people. My brother is dead now. He died 2 months ago, heart attack. And without him making payments to keep the property taxes current, the cabin will eventually be seized by the county. They will try to sell it. And someone, someday, will buy it. Someone will move in. And the cycle will begin again unless people know. Unless people understand what that place really is. The county will demolish it. They will tear it down, and it does not matter. You cannot destroy the well by destroying the cabin. My grandfather tried that. He hired a crew to fill it in, to pour concrete down into that darkness. The concrete disappeared, just vanished into the depths. The well cannot be filled. It cannot be sealed. It can only be avoided. So please, tell your story. Warn people. It is the only way to save lives now. I thanked her and hung up. I sat in that motel room for a long time, thinking about everything she had said. Thinking about Daniel, trapped in the stone, still aware, still suffering. Thinking about all the others whose names were carved into those walls. And I made a decision that I am writing this now, posting it online, because Margaret was right. People need to know. If you ever see a job posting for a caretaker position in the Colorado Rockies, if someone offers you good money to live alone in an isolated cabin and follow a simple set of rules, do not take it. Do not go there. Do not let curiosity or desperation or need drive you to that place. The cabin still stands. I looked it up on county records. The address is listed as 4847 Old Peak Road, 17 miles outside of Boulder. The property is currently in tax foreclosure. Someone will buy it eventually. Someone always does. And when they do, they will find the rules taped to the refrigerator. They will read them. They will think they can follow them. And they will be wrong. I still have nightmares. Every night, I dream of the well. I dream of that darkness, absolute and hungry, waiting patiently for me to return. Sometimes I wake up and find myself driving, my car pointed toward the mountains, my hands on the wheel moving without my conscious control. I have to pull over and sit there until the urge passes, until I remember who I am and where I am and that I am free. But am I really free? Or did it let me go just long enough to tell this story, to warn others, to plant the seed of knowledge that will make the next person who finds that cabin even more curious about what is down there in the darkness? I do not know. I may never know. What I do know is this. Rules that seem designed to protect you are sometimes designed to control you. Fear that feels like safety is sometimes a cage. And curiosity, That fundamental human drive to understand, to know, to see, can be the deadliest trap of all. My hands have healed. The burns have faded to scars. But sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the heat of that burning log in my palms. I can still smell the kerosene and smoke. I can still see those eyes staring out at me from that impossible face. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear my name whispered on the wind, carried down from the mountains. From that cabin, from the well.it is still waiting. It will always be waiting. And if you are reading this, if you are tempted to go looking for that cabin, to test the rules for yourself, to see if I am telling the truth, then please, I am begging you, do not. Some doors should never be opened. Some darkness should never be explored. And some places should be left alone, forgotten, abandoned to time and silence and the cold mountain wind. The cabin is not a home. It is not a refuge. It is a trap. And the thing that lives beneath it is patient and hungry and endlessly, eternally waiting for the next person to break the rules. Do not let that person be you. I survived, but I was lucky, or strong, or both. You might not be. And if you go down those stairs, if you see what is in that well, if you hear it speak your name in your own voice, you will not come back. Not really. You will end up like Daniel, like all the others, pressed into the stone, aware and suffering, and trapped forever in the darkness beneath the mountain. This is my warning. This is my testimony. This is the truth about the cabin in the Rockies and the rules that were never meant to save anyone. Stay away. Tell your friends. Share this story. And if you ever find yourself on a dark mountain road, looking at a weathered cabin with shuttered windows and a sagging porch, turn around and drive away as fast as you can, because the thing in the well is still hungry. And it is always waiting for the next person foolish enough to open the basement door.